Most people think of omega-3 as a supplement you add when something is missing, a kind of nutritional insurance taken late in the process. The assumption is that if the diet is reasonably healthy, omega-3 becomes optional or interchangeable with other fats. What is often overlooked is that omega-3 is not a booster layered on top of health, but a structural input that quietly shapes how cells age, communicate, and respond to stress over decades. The tension here is subtle. Omega-3 is discussed constantly, yet its most important effects are rarely the ones advertised. The discovery is not that omega-3 does something dramatic, but that it determines how well the body maintains order as time passes. By the end of this discussion, the aim is not to convince you to take more of anything, but to help you see why certain long-term outcomes quietly depend on this family of fats in ways that are easy to miss. At the most basic level, longevity is not about preventing single diseases. It is about preserving system integrity. Cells need to divide accurately, membranes need to stay flexible, signals need to arrive on time, and inflammation needs to rise and fall without drifting into chronic activation. Omega-3 enters this picture at the level of structure. Certain omega-3 fatty acids are built directly into cell membranes, especially in the brain, the heart, and the immune system. These membranes are not passive walls. They are dynamic surfaces where receptors move, signals form, and decisions are made. When membrane composition shifts, signaling behavior shifts with it. This is not a theory, but a physical property. Fats with different shapes and flexibility change how tightly membranes pack together. Over long periods, this influences how cells respond to insulin, how neurons transmit information, and how immune cells decide whether a threat is real or exaggerated. Aging is often described as accumulated damage, but another way to understand it is accumulated rigidity. Membranes become less responsive, signaling pathways lose precision, and feedback loops overshoot or undershoot their targets. Omega-3 contributes to maintaining fluidity where it matters. This does not mean it prevents aging, but it affects the slope of decline. When membranes remain flexible, cells adapt more easily to stress. When they stiffen, the same stress produces larger disruptions. This is why omega-3 appears repeatedly in longevity research, without ever acting like a miracle compound. Its role is permissive rather than dramatic. It allows systems to function within a healthier range for longer. One reason omega-3 is misunderstood is that it is often treated as a single substance. In reality, it refers to a group of related fats with different roles and efficiencies. Some come primarily from plants and serve as precursors. Others come from marine sources and are already in the form the body uses for structure and signaling. The conversion from plant-based forms into the structural forms is limited and varies widely between individuals. This variability matters over a lifetime. Two people can eat similar diets and have very different membrane compositions depending on genetics, metabolic health, and overall fat balance. Longevity is shaped by these quiet differences accumulating year after year. Another overlooked aspect is that omega-3 does not act in isolation. It operates within a competitive environment. Many of the enzymes that process omega-3 also process omega-6 fats, which are abundant in modern diets. The body uses the same machinery to produce signaling molecules from both families. The difference lies in the signals produced. Some promote resolution and balance, others promote activation and defense. Neither is inherently bad. The problem arises when the balance shifts too far in one direction for too long. Chronic low-grade inflammation is not usually the result of a single trigger. It emerges when signaling systems stay slightly misaligned over time. Omega-3 influences which signals dominate, not by shutting inflammation down, but by shaping its character and duration. From a longevity perspective, this matters because chronic inflammation accelerates many age-related processes. It affects blood vessels, joint tissue, metabolic regulation, and even brain aging. Omega-3 does not suppress the immune system. It helps it resolve responses once they have served their purpose. Resolution is a distinct biological process, not simply the absence of inflammation. Specialized molecules derived from omega-3 actively signal that a response is complete and that repair can begin. Without sufficient input for these pathways, inflammation can linger even when the original threat is gone. Over decades, this lingering state contributes to tissue wear and metabolic strain. The brain deserves special attention in any discussion of longevity. Cognitive aging is not only about neuron loss. It is about communication efficiency. A large proportion of the brain's dry weight consists of fats, and a significant fraction of those fats are omega-3 derived. These molecules are embedded in synaptic membranes where information transfer occurs. When membrane composition changes, the speed and reliability of signaling changes with it. This does not show up as a sudden deficit. It shows up as slower processing, reduced adaptability, and less resilience to stress. These changes are gradual and often attributed to age alone, even though nutritional structure plays a role in how steeply they progress. There is also an important distinction between short-term effects and long-term architecture. Many people evaluate nutrients based on how they feel within days or weeks. Omega-3 rarely produces immediate sensations. Its primary influence unfolds over years through maintenance rather than stimulation. This makes it easy to undervalue and easy to misuse. Large doses taken sporadically do not replicate the effects of consistent structural incorporation. Longevity is built on steady inputs, not periodic corrections. Another point that deserves clarity is the source of omega-3 in the food chain. Marine omega-3 originates in microscopic organisms. Fish accumulate it by consuming these organisms, and larger fish accumulate it further up the chain. This has implications for both purity and stability. Omega-3 fats are chemically fragile. Heat, light, and oxygen degrade them. Oxidized fats do not support membrane health and may contribute to oxidative stress instead. This is why the quality and handling of omega-3 sources matter more than branding or dosage claims. A degraded source undermines the very mechanisms it is supposed to support. Longevity research also emphasizes that more is not always better. Biological systems operate within ranges. Excessive omega-3 intake can alter blood clotting dynamics and interact with medications in vulnerable individuals. This is not a reason for fear, but a reminder that longevity is about alignment, not maximization. Nutrients that support long-term health do so by fitting into regulatory systems, not by overpowering them. Omega-3 works best when it restores balance relative to other dietary fats and metabolic conditions. As we zoom out, omega-3 becomes less about a single supplement and more about a pattern of inputs that support slow aging. Diets associated with longer health spans tend to include consistent sources of marine fats, lower levels of processed seed oils, and overall energy balance. Omega-3 fits into this pattern as a stabilizer. It does not override poor sleep, chronic stress, or metabolic dysfunction. It supports the systems that allow recovery when those stressors are present. This distinction is crucial for honest longevity discussions. Another underappreciated aspect is early life exposure. Membrane composition established earlier in life influences how tissues respond to stress later on. This does not mean destiny is fixed, but it does mean that longevity is cumulative. The body carries forward structural decisions made years earlier. Omega-3 contributes to these decisions quietly and persistently. This is why populations with lifelong dietary patterns rich in marine fats often show differences in aging trajectories that cannot be explained by single interventions later in life. From a systems perspective, omega-3 supports what could be called biological grace under pressure. Cells exposed to metabolic stress, inflammatory signals, or oxidative challenges behave differently depending on their structural context. Omega-3 enriched membranes tend to maintain signaling fidelity longer under strain. This does not eliminate damage, but it reduces the chance that temporary stress becomes permanent dysfunction. Over decades, this buffering effect matters. It is also important to separate scientific evidence from marketing language. Omega-3 is not a cure, not a shield against mortality, and not a shortcut to longevity. Its value lies in probability, not guarantees. It nudges systems toward resilience rather than decline. This makes it less attractive to sensational claims, but more relevant to serious discussions about aging well. As research continues, omega-3 repeatedly appears in studies of cardiovascular aging, cognitive preservation, and inflammatory regulation. The consistency of these findings across different contexts suggests a foundational role rather than a targeted effect. Longevity emerges when foundational elements are maintained. Omega-3 is one of those elements, working alongside movement, sleep, metabolic health, and social stability. The quiet lesson is this: longevity is not built by dramatic interventions applied late, but by small structural advantages maintained early and often. Omega-3 is not exciting because it does not announce itself. It works in the background, shaping membranes, signals, and responses long before problems become visible. Understanding this shifts the conversation away from supplements as solutions and toward nutrition as architecture. When viewed through this lens, omega-3 stops being a trend and becomes part of a long-term strategy, not a promise, not a guarantee, but a rational input aligned with how human biology maintains order over time. That perspective, more than any headline, is what makes omega-3 relevant to longevity. If we continue this line of thinking, another useful way to understand omega-3 and longevity is to look at what happens when systems lose coordination. Aging rarely fails all at once. It fragments. Blood sugar control drifts slightly. Vascular responses become less precise. Immune reactions overshoot, and repair mechanisms slow down just enough to matter. None of these changes are catastrophic on their own. Together, they define biological aging. Omega-3 influences coordination across systems because it sits at the intersection of structure and signaling. It affects how messages are sent, how long they persist, and how clearly they are interpreted. Take metabolic health as an example. Insulin resistance is often discussed as a glucose problem, but at the cellular level, it is also a membrane problem. Insulin receptors sit within lipid membranes, and their ability to move, cluster, and transmit signals depends on membrane composition. When membranes become rigid, receptor signaling becomes noisy. The cell hears the signal, but responds less efficiently. Over time, the body compensates by producing more insulin, and a long cascade begins. Omega-3 does not fix metabolism on its own, but by supporting membrane flexibility, it helps preserve signal clarity. Clear signals age better than loud ones. The cardiovascular system shows a similar pattern. Blood vessels are not inert pipes. Their inner lining actively senses flow, pressure, and chemical signals. This lining relies on membrane-bound receptors and signaling pathways that regulate dilation, constriction, and repair. Omega-3 influences how responsive these cells remain as mechanical stress accumulates with age. This helps explain why omega-3 shows associations with cardiovascular longevity without acting like a drug. It supports responsiveness rather than forcing outcomes. There is also an important time dimension that is often ignored. Many interventions are evaluated over months. Longevity unfolds over decades. Omega-3 operates on timescales that do not align well with short trials. Its benefits are more about reducing long-term drift than producing short-term changes. This makes it statistically subtle, but biologically meaningful. When people expect dramatic shifts in biomarkers, they may conclude it is ineffective. When researchers look at long-term patterns, a different picture emerges. Another point worth clarifying is oxidative stress. Omega-3 fats are vulnerable to oxidation, which leads some to assume they are inherently risky. In reality, oxidation risk depends on context. In a diet rich in antioxidants and low in inflammatory stressors, omega-3 integrates into membranes where it is protected and functional. In a highly processed diet with chronic oxidative stress, poorly handled omega-3 can degrade before it ever becomes structural. This again reinforces the idea that omega-3 is not a standalone solution. It works within an ecosystem. The concept of resilience keeps returning for a reason. Longevity is less about avoiding stress and more about recovering from it. Every organism experiences stress. The difference lies in how completely systems return to baseline afterward. Omega-3 contributes to recovery by supporting resolution pathways, membrane repair, and signaling reset. Without effective resolution, stress responses accumulate. With resolution, stress leaves less residue. Over time, that difference shapes aging. It is also useful to address why omega-3 discussions often become polarized. Some dismiss it as overhyped, others treat it as essential. Both positions miss the point. Omega-3 is neither optional decoration nor a magic key. It is a structural requirement whose importance depends on dietary context, life stage, and overall metabolic health. In populations where omega-3 intake is consistently low and omega-6 intake is high, restoring balance can have noticeable effects. In populations where balance already exists, additional intake produces diminishing returns. From a longevity standpoint, this leads to a practical but unglamorous conclusion. Omega-3 is most powerful when it prevents imbalance, not when it tries to correct advanced dysfunction. This aligns with what we know about aging more broadly. Prevention through structure outperforms repair through intervention. Once systems have adapted to chronic imbalance, changing inputs produces smaller effects. As the science of aging advances, researchers increasingly focus on network stability rather than single pathways. Omega-3 fits naturally into this framework. It does not target one organ or one disease. It supports communication across tissues. This is why it appears in research on the brain, the heart, the immune system, and metabolism without being owned by any one field. Longevity is interdisciplinary by nature, and omega-3 operates at that intersection. If there is a single idea to carry forward, it is this. Aging is not just about what breaks, but about what quietly holds things together. Omega-3 contributes to that cohesion. It keeps membranes responsive, signals proportionate, and inflammation resolvable. These are not headline effects, but they are foundational. Over a long enough timeline, foundations matter more than features. Understanding omega-3 in this way reframes the conversation. Instead of asking whether it extends life, a better question is whether it supports the conditions under which life can remain functional for longer. Current evidence suggests that it does, modestly, consistently, and in alignment with broader patterns of healthy aging. That is not an exciting promise, but it is a credible one. To go deeper, it helps to step back from nutrients altogether and think in terms of biological priorities. The body is not optimized for peak performance at all times. It is optimized for survival under uncertainty. Longevity, in that sense, is an emergent property of systems that remain adaptable. Omega-3 contributes to adaptability because it affects how quickly systems can shift states without breaking. This is especially relevant as organisms age, because the cost of adaptation increases over time. One of the most energy-demanding tasks in the body is maintaining order at the cellular level. Every signal sent, every membrane repaired, every inflammatory response resolved requires resources. As energy availability becomes less predictable with age, the body relies more heavily on efficient signaling. Omega-3 supports efficiency rather than intensity. When signaling pathways are clear and proportional, less energy is wasted on overreaction or prolonged responses. This matters for longevity because wasted energy accelerates wear. This becomes particularly clear when looking at the immune system across the lifespan. In early life, immune responses are fast and robust. With age, they often become either sluggish or exaggerated. Both states increase risk. Sluggish responses allow damage to persist. Exaggerated responses cause collateral damage. Omega-3 does not determine immune strength, but it influences immune tone. Tone refers to the baseline readiness and proportionality of response. A well-tuned system reacts when needed and resolves when appropriate. Longevity favors tone over force. There is also an important link between omega-3 and cellular housekeeping processes. Cells constantly recycle damaged components through tightly regulated systems. Chronic inflammation and membrane rigidity interfere with this recycling by distorting signaling cues. When cleanup slows down, damaged components accumulate, increasing stress on the system. Omega-3, by supporting membrane dynamics and resolution signaling, indirectly supports this internal maintenance. Again, the effect is subtle, but longevity is built from subtle advantages compounded over time. Another area where omega-3 quietly matters is vascular aging at the micro level. Large arteries get most of the attention, but the smallest blood vessels determine nutrient delivery and waste removal in tissues. These microvessels are highly sensitive to inflammatory signals and membrane integrity. When their responsiveness declines, tissues experience low-grade stress, even when larger circulation appears normal. Omega-3 helps preserve the signaling environment that keeps these vessels responsive. This contributes to tissue health in organs that age poorly when perfusion declines, including the brain and kidneys. It is also worth acknowledging the psychological dimension without drifting into unsupported claims. Mental resilience is partly biological. Stress perception and recovery are influenced by neural signaling efficiency and inflammatory status. Omega-3 is not a treatment for mood disorders, but long-term adequacy is associated with more stable neural environments. Stability does not mean constant positivity. It means reduced volatility. Over a lifetime, reduced volatility in stress responses may indirectly support longevity by lowering cumulative physiological burden. One reason omega-3 fits well into longevity discussions is that it aligns with evolutionary exposure. Human physiology developed in environments where marine and aquatic food sources were periodically available, and fat intake was structurally different from modern patterns. While this does not mean modern diets must replicate the past, it helps explain why extreme imbalances strain regulatory systems. Longevity often favors inputs that regulatory systems recognize without resistance. Omega-3 appears to be one of those inputs. At the same time, it is important to avoid romanticizing any single nutrient. Longevity research repeatedly shows that isolated interventions produce limited effects unless they align with overall system behavior. Omega-3 supports longevity only insofar as it is part of a broader pattern that includes energy balance, micronutrient sufficiency, physical movement, and recovery. In isolation, its effects flatten. In context, they accumulate. As people age, variability between individuals increases. This is why responses to omega-3 differ. Genetic differences, baseline inflammation, metabolic status, and existing membrane composition all influence outcomes. From a scientific standpoint, this variability is not noise. it is information. It tells us that omega-3 is not a switch but a modulator. Modulators shape trajectories rather than outcomes. When longevity is framed as trajectory management rather than life extension, omega-3's role becomes clearer. It helps keep trajectories flatter. Declines still happen, but they happen more gradually. Systems fail later, and often more cleanly, with fewer years spent in dysfunction. This is the practical meaning of Healthspan, and omega-3 contributes to it indirectly rather than dramatically. The final misconception worth addressing is the idea that longevity requires constant optimization. In reality, excessive focus on optimization can itself become a stressor. Omega-3 represents a different philosophy. It is about meeting a structural need and then letting systems regulate themselves. This hands-off support aligns with how biology prefers to operate. Intervene enough to restore balance, then step back. Seen this way, omega-3 is less a strategy and more a baseline condition. When present in appropriate amounts and forms, it allows other longevity-relevant behaviors to work more effectively. Exercise produces cleaner adaptations. Sleep restores more completely. Stress responses resolve faster. None of this is flashy, but all of it is cumulative. As the conversation around longevity matures, the most valuable insights are often the least dramatic. Omega-3 belongs in that category. It does not extend life by force. It supports the quiet biological processes that make extended function possible. That is why it continues to appear in serious discussions of aging, and why it remains relevant even as trends come and go. At this point, the picture that emerges is not of omega-3 as an intervention, but as a condition under which aging unfolds differently. Longevity is often framed as adding years, but biologically it is closer to delaying loss of coordination. When coordination is preserved, systems compensate longer, recover faster, and fail later. Omega-3 supports this coordination at levels that are rarely visible in day-to-day life, but become obvious over long time horizons. One way to see this is through the concept of biological noise. Young systems are noisy but adaptable. Old systems are quieter but less flexible. With aging, signals that once rose and fell cleanly begin to blur into the background. Inflammation does not fully switch off. Stress hormones linger. Repair signals overlap with damage signals. Omega-3 helps reduce this background noise by improving the clarity and resolution of signaling. Not by silencing responses, but by helping them end when they should. Longevity benefits from clean endings as much as strong beginnings. This also explains why omega-3 tends to show stronger associations with quality of aging than with dramatic life extension. It supports how the body experiences time rather than how long time lasts. Fewer years spent in chronic low-grade dysfunction can matter more than extending lifespan at the margins. From a human perspective, this distinction is critical. Longevity without function is not success. Omega-3 contributes more to preserve function than to extreme lifespan claims. There is a tendency to search for biomarkers that definitively prove longevity interventions work. Omega-3 resists this simplification. Its effects distribute across membranes, signaling pathways, and resolution mechanisms. No single marker captures this. Instead, its influence shows up as slower divergence from healthy ranges across many systems. Blood vessels remain responsive longer. Immune reactions stay proportional. Neural signaling degrades more gradually. These are system-level outcomes, not single numbers. Another subtle but important point is timing. Longevity inputs are most effective when applied before systems lose flexibility. Omega-3 incorporated into membranes earlier in adulthood shapes how those membranes respond decades later. This does not mean late changes are useless, but it does mean expectations should be realistic. Restoring balance is easier than reversing long-established adaptations. This is consistent with what we know about aging biology more broadly. When people ask whether omega-3 is worth attention in the context of longevity, the most accurate answer is that it depends on whether one values quiet stability over dramatic claims. Omega-3 will not make aging disappear. It will not override poor lifestyle foundations. But when foundations are reasonably solid, it reduces friction within the system. Reduced friction slows wear. Over time, that matters. This perspective also protects against extremes. It avoids dismissing omega-3 as hype, and it avoids elevating it to cure status. Both errors come from misunderstanding scale. Omega-3 operates at the scale of structure and regulation, not at the scale of symptoms. Longevity is built at that same scale. In the end, omega-3 is best understood as part of the body's long-term maintenance strategy. It supports membranes that sense the environment, signals that coordinate response, and pathways that bring systems back to baseline. These functions do not attract attention when they work well. They only become obvious when they fail. Longevity is the art of keeping them working quietly for as long as possible. Seen through this lens, omega-3 earns its place in longevity discussions, not because it promises more life, but because it supports better continuity of function across life. That is a modest claim, grounded in biology, and consistent with what careful science tends to show. And in the context of aging, modest, cumulative advantages are often the ones that matter most.